Okay, so I've got the new iPad Pros in the studio, and of course they're incredibly thin and impressive, but something that I've been really intrigued by is this nano-textured glass, which was previously only offered on Apple's high-end $1,000 monitors. But now we get them on the 11-inch and 13-inch iPad Pros. Now, Apple's nano-textured glass is not the same thing as typical matte displays. As Apple puts it, typical matte displays have a coating added to their surface that scatters light. However, these coatings lower contrast while producing unwanted haze and sparkle. Etched into the glass at the nanometer level, the nano-texture scatters light to further minimize glare for outstanding image quality even in challenging lighting conditions. Now, whether that's true or not, I put both of these displays to the test in real-world examples, both the glossy standard option and the new nano-texture option. Subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, and let's get into it. Now, the first and arguably the most important thing that I want to talk about is the actual feeling of using the nano-texture glass. Now, the nano-texture display is not so much like a Kindle or a paper-like screen protector. It's not scratchy, which is not what I was expecting at all. It's not even as textured as the Apple trackpad, which is already quite smooth. Really, the only thing that the nano-texture reminds me of is the back glass on the Pixel 8 Pro. They both share this very soft, milky smooth texture that is just really enjoyable and pleasant to use with your finger. And this is something I never thought I would say, but I actually prefer the feeling of using the nano-texture glass over the standard glass for a couple of reasons. So for one, if you've ever used any type of iPad before, you'll know that the screen picks up fingerprints and oils and smudges incredibly easily. But with a nano-texture display, it rejects fingerprints and smudges way better, which means that on top of just looking cleaner and not constantly wanting to wipe it down, the biggest benefit is that your fingers actually glide and scroll and swipe much easier, which actually makes more of a difference than you would think in terms of usability and enjoyment. This also extends into writing, drawing, and illustrating. The Apple Pencil glides smoother over the nano-texture glass and floats effortlessly on the display. I wouldn't say that it has quite the same feel as paper. It doesn't have that same, I guess, scratchy resistance. But generally speaking though, the nano-texture is a lot nicer to use because your palm actually glides smoothly on the display as you're making a big stroke, rather than getting caught on the glossy display and smudging it in the process. Even when taking notes or signing a document, it just feels a lot smoother and nicer to use on the nano-texture display than the standard glossy display. One thing to consider though is that with the nano-texture display, you're likely not going to put a screen protector on top of it, which if you're somebody who likes to take their iPad outdoors or use it with you wherever you go and don't want to worry about permanent scratches, choosing the standard option and putting a screen protector on it might not be a bad call. But the biggest question you probably have is, how does it actually affect the screen quality? So when looking at these side by side in a pitch black studio with no ambient lighting, these hardly have a difference in terms of the picture quality. Maybe ever so slightly. You can see here that the standard glass has a bit more contrast and saturation, but it's not a huge difference. But let's be real, most of the time you're probably not going to be using these iPads in a pitch black room. So as we raise the ambient brightness, you can sort of see that the two displays here have different ways of dealing with reflection. You can see that the nano-texture does lose a bit of contrast and sharpness as we raise the ambient lighting, but it does diffuse the light in an even manner. Whereas the glossy display will show specular highlights in its reflection, like the metal on my tripod. This is of course made worse when you've got a really bright light source behind you, like a big window or window shades, for example. While the standard iPad retains contrast in areas that aren't affected by the reflection, generally speaking, the reflections are quite distracting and can really impact the way that you use the device. Whereas while the nano-texture does lose out on contrast and sharpness, it does provide a more consistent experience. One common example of this is if you're indoors and you're looking down at your iPad, overhead lighting will generally have quite a prominent reflection, which makes it slightly annoying to use on the standard glossy iPad, whereas on the nano-texture, it's still noticeable, but not as bad. Outdoors, the differences between these two displays are generally less noticeable, which by the way, with a new 1000 nit brightness, you could get away with using it in the shade on a sunny day. However, I probably wouldn't recommend using it in direct sunlight. Overall, I'd say if you are in a room without any big glaring reflections or windows, the glossy display display does look a tad bit nicer. It's got deeper blacks and the image looks saturated and more live. But really the biggest point here is that on the Nano-texture, you're not sacrificing much. I think Apple did a really nice job and I quite like the image quality that I'm getting out of the Nano-texture. Now the one final thing I'll say here is that on the Nano-texture display, when you're looking at a mostly white image, like if you're looking at a document or article, there is sort of this purplish greenish fringe effect that is noticeable. It's slightly distracting and I wouldn't say it's a deal breaker, but I thought I'd mention it. So what's the takeaway and which one should you get? If you're somebody who likes to take your iPad around, whether it's at work or your home office, or you're using it outdoors or at a coffee shop, there are a lot of scenarios where reflections generally can be unpredictable. And in these scenarios, the Nano-texture glass really does help in cutting down reflections and allowing you more flexibility in the positioning of wherever you're sitting or using your iPad. On the flip side though, if you are somebody who prioritizes image quality and sharpness, and you're gonna be using your iPad in a more controlled environment, let's say around your home, without huge glaring windows or reflections, then I'd say the standard glass is probably gonna suit you just fine. If it were up to me, I would probably go with the Nano-texture 9 times out of 10. Just the usability and how my finger glides over it just feels really nice over the standard glossy display, which makes me really sad that Apple decided to lock the Nano-texture display behind the 1TB and 2TB models. This is incredibly frustrating because for most people, the base model 256 storage is gonna be fine. But now if you want the Nano-texture display, you're going from $1,000 on the 11-inch model now all the way up to $1,700 and $2,000 on the 13-inch model. I really hope that Apple brings this Nano-texture glass to other products and especially the base storage model of these iPad Pros. That would be really nice. Okay, hope this video helped you out. If it did, consider subscribing. Also, check out my wallpapers linked down below. Leave a like on your way out and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.